The 2014 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, brought to you by Georgia Public Broadcasting. The Republican race for state school superintendent.
Good evening, I'm Scott Slade, host of Atlanta's Morning News and WSB Radio. We'd like to welcome our viewers and our live audience to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, originating from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting in Atlanta. This is the debate between the Republican candidates in the race for Georgia school superintendent. Now, let's meet the candidates. They are, in alphabetical order, Mary Kay Bacayao is a college math professor and former member of the Fayette County School Board. Ashley Bell is an attorney and former Hall County commissioner. Michael Buck currently serves as chief of staff to the state school superintendent. Next, Cheryl Dawes is a former educator and former chair of the Gwinnett Republican Party. Alan Fort, superintendent of the Quitman County School System in South Georgia. Nancy Jester is a former DeKalb County Board of Education member. Next, Fitz Johnson is an attorney and businessman. Kara Willis has been an educator for 18 years. She currently works as a graduation coach at North Springs Charter High School in Atlanta. And finally, Richard Woods is an Irwin County school administrator. He's worked at various educational positions for 22 years. Now, let's meet our panelists this evening. They are Greg Bluestein. He's a political reporter covering the governor's office and state politics for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Scott Light is an anchor and reporter for CBS Atlanta 46. And Donna Lowry is the education reporter for 11 Live News in Atlanta. Tonight's debate will consist of 3 rounds. For more information on the rules of each round, you can visit the Atlanta Press Club website at atlantapressclub.org. Now, our individual reporters will have questions for our panel in just a moment. But first, we agreed in our meeting before this debate this evening that we think the rest of Georgia would like to know how you all feel about a real issue that has been polarizing, needless to say, in elections even outside school superintendents. So we want to get you on the record, 30 seconds apiece, on how you feel about Georgia's participation in the Common Core education standards. And Mary Kay Bacayao, we'll start with you.
I bring knowledge and truth to the debate over education standards. My study proved that the new Common Core state standards are 1 to 2 years behind our former Georgia performance standards. So what we really need to do is focus on our testing system, because our testing system is keeping our kids from getting ahead because they're based on restrictive testing on these lower level standards.
All right, thank you very much. Ashley Bell, how do you feel about Georgia's participation in the Common Core education standards?
You know, fundamentally, I'm against the federal government being involved in local education. Now, as a charter school chair, we had a great hearing at our school maybe 2 months ago. We asked all parents to come out and tell us how they felt about Common Core. And I think that's what's most important. All across the state, you're hearing parents' frustrations with their ability to help their children. You know, the bottom third in our state of children who don't have the help, it starts at home. And those parents are having a hard time helping their children with their homework, and that's what we have to fix, the home problem.
Thank you very much. Next, Michael Buck, your thoughts on the Common Core.
I'm strongly supportive of the current standards for a wide variety of reasons, but my opinion is not the most important one. The governor's office supports the standards. The chambers of commerce support the standards. The legislature supports the standards. 70 to 75% of the teachers out there support the standards. Our military supports the standards. It is not the standards that are the problem. It's the methodology with how they're being instructed. They're solid standards. We need to stay the course.
Thank you very much. And Cheryl Dawes, your thoughts on Georgia's participation in the Common Core education standards.
I've been going down to the Capitol for 18 years working to represent parents through the PTA, and there have always been standards. This is the 3rd set of standards in the last 6 years. Are they the best standards we should have right now? Absolutely not have the federal government involved with our kids' education. I believe in local control and decisions made by the local school board and superintendents.
Thank you. And Alan Ford, your thoughts on the Common Core.
Thank you, Scott. As a school superintendent, I am involved with standards and teaching every day. I am for kicking what we don't need in Common Core to the curb. I'm for using what is positive in Common Core, that we involve the teachers, administrators, and parents of this state to invent standards in a curriculum that best reflect the needs of the state of Georgia.
Thank you very much. Nancy Jester, your thoughts on the Common Core, please.
Hi, I'm Nancy Jester, and I reject Common Core. I reject it because it's a bad idea. It's not a conservative idea. It's not a Republican idea. It's a bureaucratic idea, and it won't drive achievement for Georgia's children or give value to the taxpayers. In fact, it will likely increase costs over time with another bureaucracy, a standards bureau of sorts. If simply stating a standard or a goal drove achievement, No Child Left Behind would have been a resounding success, and it just wasn't. I reject Common Core. This is Nancy Jester. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Ed Fitz Johnson, your thoughts on Georgia's participation in the Common Core education standards?
Yes, thank you. I've been very clear during my entire campaign. I am for rigorous standards for our students, rigorous standards that are developed right here in Georgia by Georgia educators, Georgia parents, Georgia business leaders. We need to take what is right with our Common Core and let's use it. And then everything else that is not applicable, we're going to take that and we're going to move it aside. Let's take what's right and move forward.
Thank you very much. And Kira Willis, your thoughts on the Common Core, please.
Thank you very much. First, we need to remember that this is not a federal mandate. It's states opting into the Common Core standards. I also believe that since the College Board and the SAT, the ACT, International Baccalaureate Standards, and our ITBS have all aligned their testing with Common Core standards, it's irresponsible for Georgia to secede from a national testing state and come up with its own set of standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Richard Woods, your thoughts on the Common Core?
As the candidate in 2010, I opposed the Race to the Top grant, which the Common Core standards are embedded. Today, I still say that we must have common sense over Common Core. Georgia must make sure that it controls its educational destiny and move forward with this. We must work together with our teachers and that we have a high correlation with our standards, because the standards have a direct bearing on student achievement. And so this is very important, and we must have the very best for our kids in the days ahead. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for handling that toss-up question, all and every one. Now let's get started with our reporter questions. In the first round, each candidate will be asked one question by one of our panelists. Candidates have 60 seconds to answer the question. Scott Light, you get the first question for Alan Ford.
Mr. Ford, I think you and all of us here in this room know that there was another example of violence outside of a high school campus earlier this week. 4 students were shot. The shooter didn't try to come into the school, but it still prompts the following question. Do you think Georgia educators should be trained in gun safety and then have access to those weapons if an emergency occurs?
And I believe it's 60 seconds for this answer.
I believe that first and foremost, we need to be very careful. We want to keep guns out of school, so we have to be very careful about bringing guns into school. That if we have teachers or anyone that is in the school, they must be highly trained, not just somewhat trained, not just a little trained, but they would have to be highly trained in how to use a gun, how to operate a gun, how to secure a gun. I've seen people go into fights, policemen, and come out without a gun. And so we have to be very, very careful about how we arm personnel that are in schools, how we train them to use guns or weapons in school, and that we do not perceive that kids in school, where do we go, K-12, just high school, that we do not create this military stance in a school where schools are dangerous. Schools are safe places. They've been safe places. And before we overreact to guns and control, I think we need to think very carefully about how we arm people and especially how we train people to be prepared for gun safety.
Thank you. Greg Bluestein, you get the next question to Cheryl Dawes.
Ms. Dawes, it's not exactly a secret that the current superintendent and governor do not have exactly a strong personal relationship. Do you think that's an important facet of the job, and what would you do to enhance it if so?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that question. That's exactly why I'm running. I've been going down there, as I mentioned, for quite a few years, and it's been so frustrating as a mom to see that the superintendent just doesn't seem to want to get along with the governor. I fully intend to work with Governor Deal and quit fighting with each other in administration and start rowing in the same direction. I know a lot of the legislators. I'm on board with their policies that they want to implement, and I feel like my job description is to help everybody get it done. I'm not a yes man. Behind closed doors, I will stand up for what I think they may be doing wrong, but you don't come out into the public and fight in the newspapers and on TV, and I certainly will not be running for governor in 4 years.
Donna Lowry, your question now for Kira Willis.
That's right. I know, Ms. Willis, you're in the school system, the high schools in particular. The high school graduation rate is pretty abysmal. We saw it raised by 2%, and the college and career readiness performance standards showed that it went backwards. So you're in the high schools. Tell us what you think should be done to improve the high school graduation rate in this state, which is one of the worst in the country.
But it's interesting that you asked that, because I believe that Georgia, if we could align our grading practices with that of the other states in the union, the top performing states in the union, then we could then immediately, we would see an immediate and valid jump and increase in graduation rates. I was doing a little sort of anecdata, and I saw that 42% of our students are failing classes between a 60 and a 69. In Iowa, the highest performing and graduating state in the union, they pass their students at a 60%. It would also lower our cost per pupil expenditures and not cost taxpayers one dime. So we're not really the bottom fourth in Georgia, or Georgia's not really the bottom four. If we would align our grading practices with that of the other states in the union, I believe we would see an immediate and valid increase in graduation rates and an immediate and valid drop in cost per pupil expenditures.
Scott, it is now your turn to ask Ashley Bell a question.
Mr. Bell, on your website, and you've said publicly that you oppose the Common Core standards, and you write this on your website, quote, "No bureaucrat knows better than parents and teachers who live in our communities." But as you also know, Common Core was developed by educators, by business leaders, by governors in more than 40 states, been overwhelmingly approved and endorsed by military leaders and, again, the business community. On the Common Core website, they say this: how standards are taught and how the curriculum is developed is led entirely at the state and local level. So is Common Core being disingenuous with the truth there in terms of maintaining local levels in terms of authority over education? And what is your alternative to Common Core?
Well, I think we have to look at the problem. The problem is we have a lot of our students failing Common Core, especially the math portion. And why is that the case? Of course, there's some problems with implementation of Common Core. But Common Core in theory, I'm against. I'm against the fact that you can take a federal grant and have it have so many strings and so many chains attached to it. I'm a former county commissioner. I know what it's like to say no to a federal grant. I know what it's like to say no to federal dollars because they always come with strings and chains. When you look at Common Core, we're still not done getting the bill. Think of how much money we're spending at the local level to align all of our SLO assessments, which are student learning objective assessments, to Common Core all across this state. Every district is recreating the wheel and aligning with Common Core. That's more money being spent by bureaucrats and administrative level, coming up with more tests to align with Common Core. That's an unfunded mandate. That was not what Georgia signed up for.
Thank you very much. And Greg, your question for Richard Woods, please.
Yeah, Mr. Woods, I'll riff on that. If Georgia were to pull out of Common Core, what would you do about the standardized test that's now costing millions to be developed?
Yeah, with the standardized test, I think we would first have to establish what our standards are, because that would definitely determine what we're going to test. The testing itself, we could fall back to some proven models such as the Iowa test, which has been used for many years. We also have a baseline with the NAEP as well. Looking at tests, I think we have to look at why are we testing our children. Using the CRCT as an example, basically is an autopsy report, not something that we actually move our kids forward with. What we need to do is allow our teachers to take, tests, from a diagnostic standpoint and move forward. Take our kids where they're at, evaluate to educate, so that we can have a system which, truly reflects learning across the board. And again, having a baseline, such as some of the tests I mentioned, that we can't, have a match line across our states and even with the international community.
Now, Donna Lowry, your question for Fitz Johnson, please.
Yes, Mr. Johnson, let's talk about the Common Core. Your military background would suggest that, given that military students have to travel around, that you'd want students to go to different states and have the same standards wherever they go. Why don't you feel that that's a good idea?
Well, I don't exactly feel it's not a good idea, and let me tell you why I feel that way. I spent 21 years in the Army as an Army officer. I also grew up as a military dependent. My dad's a retired brigadier general, and we moved several times. And I think what we need to ensure is that if I move from Texas to Kansas to Georgia, that when I get to Georgia, we are all on the same sheet of music. Now, I don't believe we're going to be exactly on the same page, but I want to make sure that we are able to compare, and when I show up, I'm not going to move back a grade or move someone forward a grade. We just want to make sure that the standards are rigorous and we can compete. We need to make sure that not only that we can compete, it drives our economic growth. And when we talk about our military folks moving around, we want to make sure that they feel comfortable when they move in here to Georgia, and their students are challenged when they move here to Georgia.
And back to Scott Light now for a question for Nancy Jester.
Mr. Chester, I want to make sure, I read your bio, but I want to make sure I'm clear here. I know that you've devoted a lot of your adult years to education, but have never been a teacher, correct?
Correct.
And I know there are several others who haven't as well, but you get this question. I've talked to a lot of teachers over the years, and they've told me that they want their leaders and administrators to have been in the trenches, to have walked in their shoes. What have you done in the past, or what would you do as superintendent to better understand the mission of leading a classroom?
Well, I think the reason that I'm running for state school superintendent has a lot to do with the problems in the classroom right now. We know that we've grown bureaucracy at alarming rates here, and that has really starved the classroom of resources, and it's starved teachers of compensation they could have had. In fact, between 92 and 2009, student enrollment in Georgia grew 41%, but central office spending grew 74%. We have over 111,000 teachers in the state of Georgia, and had we not grown bureaucracy at that rate, every teacher right now could have an $8,000 pay raise, but sadly, that money accrued to the bureaucracy. And we have hired plenty of educators to be superintendents, and they have let this go on because they have been in that bureaucracy that continues to take resources away from those very teachers. We need somebody who will focus the financial management so that the money can go into the classroom and to teachers rather than starve those classrooms.
Thank you. And Greg Bluestein, it's your turn now to ask Mary Kay Bacayao a question.
Ms. Bacayao, you've talked about the possibility of not taking federal funds for education programs. Can you elaborate on your position, and how would you make up that funding?
Yes, in 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed that began the path of the Department of Education that we're on now. And we have so many restrictions coming from the U.S. Department of Education. Everything is just passing through our state. We're not really considering what they're giving us. We're just taking it. For example, in our school rating scores, they say at McDonald's the hamburger has to be at least 70% beef. Our school rating scores, it only has to be 60% about student achievement. All the rest, it could be anything. All these things that Arnie Duncan wants us to do. So in order to make up that funding, we don't even have to have additional funding, because what they're having us do for this $200 million that we received from the Race to the Top is costing us billions of dollars.
Thank you very much. And Donna, you get the last question of this round from Michael Buck.
That's right. Then I have to get back to the question of the fact that you work for the current state school superintendent, and the question of whether or not that relationship between the governor and the state school superintendent is important, given that your current boss right now doesn't have a good relationship with the governor.
I thank you for the question, and absolutely, I understand that you've got to build bridges. I've spent my entire career building bridges. If you are not diplomatic, you can't be a high school principal dividing up court time with the basketball court for boys basketball, girls basketball, the wrestling team, and the competition cheerleaders. God gave me 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. I will listen twice as much as I speak. I know that if we're going to truly move the needle on student achievement, I've got to have a positive relationship with the State Board of Education, with the governor's office, and with the legislature, and I've got to have credibility with the field. I've got to have all of those bridges built if we're going to move the needle. I have the skill set to do that. I've earned my stripes coming up through the ranks. You have to be diplomatic in order to be successful at the high school principal level. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that first round. That concludes our first round. In the second round, each candidate will ask one question to the opponent of their choice, and each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and then 30 seconds for rebuttal. By random selection, Ashley Bell gets the first question.
Well, thank you. I want to ask my good friend Mike Buck. I think this follows up with a question that was just asked. A lot of what you just said is about what you will do. Well, you actually kind of run the office right now. You are the chief of staff. You are the department head. You pretty much run DOE at this point. How many times have you gone to meet with the governor and his staff to build that bridge?
Thank you, Mr. Bell, and I appreciate the question coming from you. In our Gwinnett Forum, I believe you referred to the employees at the Department of Education as idiots. And I'm proud to work with the folks that I have at the Department of Education. They're a wonderful team. I've been over to the governor's office each and every time I was asked to attend meetings. I've gone to testify legislative hearings. I've been available. I've made my staff available to work with each and every request we get from across the street so that we can provide input on any legislation that's going to involve education. Thank you.
30-second rebuttal, Mr. Bell.
I think that's absolutely incorrect that I called anybody an idiot for that sake. What I did say, and I think which is clear today, is that you want to say that you're the candidate that can meet and build those bridges, but you only go and ask. What have you done proactively to build that bridge? Because obviously, a lot of folks see you as John Barge 2.0.
You had 15 seconds left in your time if you want to answer that question, because he asked you another question.
When I made the decision to run for this office, one of the first calls I made was to the governor's office to let him and his office know that I was going to be participating in this race and establish the fact that I want to have positive relationships as I move forward and be the state school superintendent.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Cheryl Dawes, the second question goes to you.
Well, Mike, I hate for this to be pick on Mike Buck Day, but you are currently in the office and some of us aren't that happy. How do you feel about teacher tenure? And what would you do to, well, just tell me how you feel about it and elaborate.
I think the tenures are the absolute key to how students achieve in the classroom. I think we have been treating them like second-class citizens for a long time, and there's a lot of research that will tell you that the most important factor on how a student moves in a given classroom once they enter the door is the caliber of that teacher. That being said, we've got to give our teachers the support they need, the resources they need, the 180 instructional days. As far as teacher tenures go, if our teachers have been loyal, faithful, and are effective teachers, they need to stay in the system. If they are ineffective, no matter what the system is, then we need to counsel them out of the system. The vast majority of teachers I know do a great job. They care about kids. They're heartfelt. They're doing this because they love children, certainly not for the paycheck.
And rebuttal, Ms. Dawes.
I'd like to see tenure more aligned with the real world. If you don't perform in your job, if you don't get the results that your boss set for you, you're let go. I would like to see an evaluation system that's tough on teachers and that they rise to the challenge. The good ones will still remain, and we can find some new young people out of school that are job hunting right now and put them into the system.
And Kira Willis, it's your turn to ask a question of an opponent.
Thank you very much. Dr. Buck, do you think that it is important for our next state school superintendent to have any sort of experience in public education?
Thank you very much, and I'm 3 for 3. I heard if you get a lot of questions, it means you're the front runner, so I take it as a positive sign. And absolutely, the state school superintendent will be in charge of a 1.7 million students across the state, a $7.4 annual billion-dollar budget. He'll be providing recommendations to the state board on policy that will guide the instruction for that 1.7 million students and over 100,000 educators. I can tell you from firsthand experience, if you haven't walked the walk, you can't talk the talk. You cannot have credibility with classroom teachers, with building level principals, with superintendents. And if you think for a minute you can change the educational outcomes all across Georgia from the state school superintendent's office without the support of your local teachers, you're running up the wrong tree. We have to have credibility with the field to bring these changes about. You have got to have education experience to do this job and to do it well.
30-second rebuttal, Ms. Willis.
Thank you, Dr. Buck. You have the educational experience and background for this position, and I would be pleased to see you, Mr. Fort, or myself in office, as we are the only ones with educational experience, the only ones in the race who will stop playing political football with our children and start doing right by them. Georgia's children deserve the best education, and if Georgia is going to continue to move forward, we need an educator in office to make that happen. Thank you very much.
And Nancy Jester, your question for one of your opponents, please.
I'd like to ask a question of Mary Kay. Mary Kay, you and I both hold the same position about Common Core. We reject it, and we both respect very much Senator Liggins' work on that. Can you speak to why you opposed his efforts to end Common Core and pull Georgia out with his Bill 167, I believe?
1 minute.
Yes, I did work on a report for Senator Liggin, and that report that compared the Georgia Performance Standards and the Common Core was given to the state school board and the legislators. And he and we worked together to fight against Common Core. 3 times I voted against Common Core, twice as a school board member in our legislative priorities, and once when I voted against the Common Core textbooks. Senator Ligon is a wonderful representative, and he was fighting so hard to get us out of Common Core. Unfortunately, Senate Bill 167 was actually going to add the social studies standards, required social studies standards, which would have gone through an advisory committee. And being that I went around the state to the listening sessions, I knew that an advisory committee would probably just rubber stamp the standards, just like the state legislature at the listening sessions were planning to do. So Senator Ligon and I, we are working together against Common Core. Thank you.
Ms. Jester, 30 seconds rebuttal.
Well, I think it's important to take victories where you can get them, and I think that would have been an important victory to get Common Core out of the state of Georgia and help us move forward with stronger standards, more local control for districts and the classroom. So I wish that we had been able to have supported Senator Ligon on that and gotten that passed. And as state school superintendent, I look forward to working with him to do just that.
Fitz Johnson, you may now ask a question of the opponent of your choice.
Thank you very much. You know, I have a lot of respect for everyone up here stepping out and running for this office. And I can go right down the line and tell you something great about each one of them. So what I'd simply like to do is, Mike, you just had a little break, so I'm going to get you back in the game. You sit in you have a unique opportunity. You have a perspective from a sitting chief of staff. What is something that you think can help each one of us up here should one of us be elected to state school superintendent?
Fitz, thank you so much for your kind words and for the question. I have had the honor and the privilege for the past 3.5 years to serve with some of the best and brightest educators in the country, and I mean that sincerely. I went up with some preconceived notions about what I might find at the DOE. I was an assistant superintendent, and I had some opinions about what was going on. And I remembered at the time we had math issues, and when I got in there, I was going to hitch up my britches, and I was going to do something about the math issue. I was going to go talk to the math department. So I went walking down there to find my math department. It was a department of 1, and she is awesome, but she is responsible for K-12 instruction, professional learning, all of the instructional resources for K-12. We were thin when I got there. We are anorexic now. I say be thankful that you've got so many talented educators up there. Listen to what they have to say. They care about the kids. They've got the expertise to move the needle forward with student achievement. Thank you again, Fitz.
Mr. Johnson, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mike, for your candor. Thank you for your honesty, and we do appreciate your work. And I tell you, I am the kind of candidate that will reach out to others for help, for assistance, for guidance. Even all the folks on this stage can almost guarantee a phone call from me should I be your next state school superintendent.
And Mary Kay Bacayal, your turn.
I would like to ask Nancy Jester, since she asked me a question, I'll return the favor. I believe that school officials and the state school superintendent need to be accountable to the parents first and to the tax-paying community. In Augusta, you stated that the parents need to be held accountable for student academic performance. Who do you think the parents need to be accountable to?
I do not recall saying exactly that. I think what I have always said is that, everybody is part of the success, the academic success of children. Of course, their parents are responsible. They're ultimately responsible for the development of a child. And of course, teachers and the school districts are as well. But no one can compare to what a parent does. So I'm certainly not for somehow grading parents on that. What I will say is, in the state of Georgia, in aggregate, we're going to have classrooms that have neglectful parents as part of that equation. But you know what? They've got that in every state, and they're outperforming us. They're bad parents in Tennessee, but they have an 87% graduation rate, and we're at 71. So what are they doing better for those kids at risk? They've got poor, vulnerable kids there, and I think those are the types of things we need to be doing in the state of Georgia, looking at those drivers, and that's what I'll do as state school superintendent.
Dr. Bacchial, 30 seconds.
I believe that parents are the ones that are ultimately responsible for their children, and they should be making choices about what their children learn. The Common Core state standards are lower level standards, and parents are upset that their kids are having to take tests on lower level standards is holding them back. I don't think parents need to be made accountable. I think school officials and the state school superintendent need to be made accountable.
And Richard Woods, your question for an opponent, please.
Okay. I'd like to ask Mr. Johnson, please, with this. The office we seek, of course, is that of State Superintendent of Schools. One of us will have to oversee the implementation of teacher evaluation, administrator evaluation, school accountability measures, student testing, standards, and student learning objectives. Each will have a direct bearing on student learning and teacher effectiveness. Please share with us your past public education experience as both a teacher and an administrator.
Thank you. Now, it's clear. You can see my resume. I've not been a school teacher in the classroom. I've been a coach for over 35 years. I've run a successful business that I grew from 0 employees to over 1,700 employees, 35 states, 7 foreign countries, worldwide. What you need is leadership, and understand that leadership is transferable. I got experts. I got folks that can understand and I can put to work to do those types of things. Now, I got to tell you, it's a lot. There's a lot. And in my job, I had 85 different task orders, again, across this great country. I can't know it all. I can't. But what I can do is I can hire the bright people, the best and the brightest around us, to make sure that we address those needs.
Mr. Woods, 30 seconds, back to you.
Again, leadership, I would agree, is transferable in that. But also what we do need is we need experience and we need wisdom. Wisdom that I bring as a 22-year veteran of public education, pre-K through 12th grade experience at the school level. Again, 14 years at the classroom, 8 years in administration, being assistant principal, K-5 curriculum director, hospital homebound system director, homeschool system director. Those are things that we have to look at because they are going to have a direct bearing on teacher performance and student performance as well. So we need that experience at the school level. Thank you.
Hey, Michael Buck, it's your turn to ask a question.
Finally, I get to ask a question. Mr. Ford, my good friend, Mr. Ford, do you think the state school superintendent position should be elected or appointed?
I think sometimes I have seen in the past elections and up to this one where our choice of candidates aren't exactly what you would call lead educators, great educators, or those who have experience in education in our state. After all, it is a state school superintendent. And I think that with the right reasoning, with the right leadership in the governor's office, the General Assembly, with the right state board of education, that I should be the last elected state school superintendent here. Because this state deserves someone who is an educational leader, who has experience, who has knowledge about curriculum, instruction, assessment, operations, transportation, all of these things that I do. And we talk about bureaucracy. I am the only person in my office that does all of these things, so we're kind of cut lean to the bone. So I think that this state deserves someone who is state school superintendent, who has all this tremendous knowledge about how to operate a state school system the way it should be operated.
30 seconds back to you, Michael Buck.
Thank you, Alan. You've got the educational experience and background for this position, and I would be pleased to see you, Ms. Willis, or myself in this office, as we are the only ones with the educational experience, the only ones in the race who will stop playing political football with our children and start doing right by them. Georgia's children deserve the best possible education. If Georgia is going to continue to move forward, we need an educator in this position. Thank you.
And Alan Ford, you get the final question in this round for one of your opponents.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Ms. Willis, how would her experience as a graduation coach at a high school deem her appropriate for the state school superintendent position?
Thank you, Alan. I tell you, these past 2 weeks with the Georgia high school graduation test coming down for our students and me sitting with children and telling them that they aren't going to graduate shows me that some of the laws that are being passed down to our children aren't firsthand experiences. We've got people who don't understand the implications of what's happening in our schools. We've talked about the 70% graduation rate, but why is it 70%? What are we doing different? Well, I can tell you what we're doing differently. We're not aligning our grading practices to that of the rest of the states in the union. I am one of the candidates who will actually ask the questions. Why is this happening? What are we doing wrong? What are we doing differently? And how are we failing our children? And instead of simply making a law or a policy, we will explore the laws and the policies. And if it's not in the best interest of our children, and if it's not in the best interest of our schools, we will stop that policy and we will stop that law. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ford, 30 seconds back to you.
I would just like to say, why would we elect an agriculture secretary in this state that does not have experience in agriculture? Why would we elect an insurance commissioner in this state that does not have experience with insurance? Why would we elect a state school superintendent that does not have experience in education and in this state that understands how to deal with people, how to deal with education, and how to deal with the children? Sometimes we get all in these adult issues. We have to remember this is about the children of our state and the future of our state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For those just joining us, this is the debate between the Republican candidates for state school superintendent. We'll now go to our third and final round. In this round, each panelist will ask a question, our journalist ask a question of the candidate of his or her choice until we run out of time, and it's time for those closing statements. I will determine when a rebuttal is appropriate. And Donna Lowry, you get the first question.
Yes, my question is of Nancy Jester. We know that there's a fair amount of weariness and distress when it comes to the school systems these days, especially with school and fighting and those kinds of things. You were removed from the DeKalb County School Board by the governor because of what was regarded as a fairly dysfunctional school board. What can you tell us about how you will work with a state school board if you are elected?
Thank you. I'm Nancy Jester, and I found $54 million in deceptive budgeting practices that wore away the accumulated cash reserves of the third largest district in our state. That affected all taxpayers and children in the state of Georgia. And it's that kind of financial acumen that I'm going to bring to the state school superintendent's office. We have no markers for accountability in the way we spend tax dollars in education, and it is depriving teachers and classrooms of resources. And it is very sad, and it's been brought to you by the bureaucracy, by the educational establishment. And so I look forward to being able to bring best practices, both financial and academic, that are going on in other states that are driving successes there. We're in the dark ages here. I know it. I've blogged about it. I've researched about it. I've been a speaker all around this state on this subject. And I look forward to bringing those ideas to Georgia so that we can once again compete with Tennessee and Texas and North Carolina. Thank you. I'm Nancy Jester.
Greg Bluestein, your turn to ask a question, please.
Yeah, this is for Mr. Bell. I'm sensing a sort of alliance between Dr. Buck, Superintendent Fort, and Ms. Willis here, who are arguing they are the ones who have classroom experience. What do you bring to the table, with your background that they don't?
This is almost like Survivor. You're right. I do have a unique background. I've been elected by my constituents in Hall County, and I've served my entire term. I wasn't removed from office. I've taken a 9-figure budget, and I made it an 8-figure budget. I was able to cut the budget by 15%. You can't cut a budget in local government unless you keep the federal government out of it. You keep the strings and the chains from D.C. off of your budget. So I know what it's like. I know what it's like to make tough personnel decisions about who's got to go, who's got to stay, and what services to be provided. I'm also a charter school chair. Our charter school system was one of the first in the state. The first cohort were raced to the top. I've seen teacher evaluations first out front because we were the pilot there. I've seen a lot of the programs that are rolling out next year. We were the first. So as a charter school middle school chair and a high school chair, I can tell you that what these educrats think works in Atlanta doesn't play out how it does as supposed to on the ground.
Next question comes from Scott Light.
And it's for Cheryl Dawes. Ms. Dawes, you've been a proponent and very outspoken about wanting English only in Georgia classrooms. You've said, quote, there's an inability to adequately teach because of language barriers, and that you want to keep classroom instruction from being slowed down due to students' inability to understand English. I think that's a very sweeping statement that needs to be quantified in this respect. Out of 1.7 million kids in Georgia schools, how many are slowing down the classroom instruction?
I appreciate you asking that question because I did want to get a chance to clarify. I don't have exact numbers, and it's been interesting going around the state to find out there are pockets in Georgia, and I happen to live in one of the pockets where the kids would come into our schools and not speak English. I volunteered in the ESOL classes, and we would talk to the kids in English only. That's what any immersion program does. But eventually I switched to Spanish to talk to them, and I would find out that they had not been in any school before they came in and were in this class, and they were in 6th grade. So what I would like to do is implement a program. I think any of us would know that if these kids go to apply for a job, the fact that they can speak English will give them more job opportunities, higher advancement opportunities, and more pay. And I think it's a shame if the K-12 system doesn't take time to teach them English and make sure they know and have that job skill before they graduate. And I'd like to help implement that and make sure it happens.
We have about 9 minutes left in this round, and the next question comes from Donna Lowry.
Yeah, Mr. Ford, I know you've dealt with the austerity cuts in your district, and now you're going to see an infusion of some money. I know you've had some lessons learned through this whole process. As you decide to ramp up a little bit with more money, what are some of the things, some of the first things you think you want to see happen?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is restore our 180 school student days and our 190 teacher days so that our teachers are paid full money and our students get the full education in this state. The next thing we're going to do is to make sure that our technology is up to date. We do have iPads for every student in my high school, and we're going to ramp up this technology to middle school and upper elementary school so that our students are fully immersed in technology. But we're going to support our teachers also to make sure that they understand with professional development, professional learning, that we continue to be on the cutting edge each and every time about new teaching techniques, innovative education, and the way that schools in our state can make sure that we give our students the very best education that we possibly can, even in a rural system in South Georgia. I've been all over the state, Metro Atlanta, North Georgia. We want to make education equal as we go along in this state to make sure that all students have a skill when they graduate from high school.
Greg Bluestein, the next question for you, please.
Yeah, Mr. Johnson, much of the governor's race is shaping up to be a fight over how to increase education funding, or whether to in the first place. What would you do as superintendent to get school districts more funding aside from just pushing lawmakers and the governor to do so?
Well, I'll tell you, as a business person, the finances and the financial piece is very, very important. Now, we know that finances aren't the only thing that we need to rely on when we talk about educating our youngsters. I think I talked a little bit earlier about leadership. The idea if you have to be able to collaborate, you have to be able to reach out to the business community and say, hey, are there ways where we can partner with our business communities and our business leaders out there to help these school districts? Also with our faith-based organizations. You know, at my church, we went out and we redid and cleaned an entire school, spent an entire day, over 400 volunteers from my church fall in on this school and really gave it the up and down. And I tell you, those kids, those administrators, those parents, and those educators were very proud and very excited the next morning when they came into their school. Those are the things that we need to do as we push down to our local school districts to give them those ideas. And also for the DOE to treat themselves as the customer, as we want to make sure that we are a service-oriented organization.
Time is up. I'm sorry. That's a minute. Thank you very much. Scott Light, your question.
Mr. Buck, this one's for you. In your 30 years in education, you and others have watched either, depending on what you're looking at, several to many countries hopscotch over the U.S. in terms of leading in education worldwide. I'd like for you to name another country that you studied that ranks higher than the U.S., and what would be the immediate best practices from that country that could be implemented in Georgia classrooms.
I'm so glad you asked. We made a trip to Germany very early on to see how they did education. They were doing so well on the PISA scores, and they've got arguably one of the best apprenticeship programs in the world with how they tie education to relevant real-world experiences and get kids into the world of work. They do a lot of things really well, and it helped us springboard our Career Pathways Initiative, where we have rolled out over 200 new courses, 17 career clusters, which will allow young people to find their passion. The boys and girls who are dropping out, by and large, it's not a lack of aptitude or ability, it's they don't see the relevance. We have to help them find their passion. When we do, when they get engaged, they stay in school and they become productive citizens when they leave us. Thank you.
Donna Lowry.
Ms. Bacayo, you alluded earlier to the fact that there are parents who don't want their kids to take tests, high-stakes tests, based on the standards that exist right now. If you don't have the standards, though, what are your feelings about parents being able to opt out and yet still have the accountability within the classroom? How does that function work under your plan?
Accountability is very important, but we have to make sure we have accountability done properly. Right now, we're accountable to government standards, and the government standards are causing us to fall behind the other nations. As I said earlier, they're 1 to 2 years behind our former standards and even further behind the international standards. My full study shows the international standards, and you can just look at line by line and see how far behind we are in math. What we need to do to have accountability is to have tests of reading level, math level, writing level, and verifiable science. And the State Department of Education can make sure that kids know how to read and give reports on their reading level. And the local school boards, the parents and the teachers of local communities can make decisions about what our kids are reading.
And the next question from Greg Bluestein, please.
Superintendent Fort. Governor Deal has vowed in a second term to focus his energies and his political capital on redoing the QBE education funding formula. This, of course, has been a long-time complaint of superintendents who just view it as never being fully funded in the first place. How do you feel about this push, and would you be behind it?
Yes, I think we certainly need to reform our funding formula. I would love to have a number, because we give, we take, we give, we take. You know, we take less 5 meals, then we give some money back, then we take it in austerity money, and then we give it back in equalization money, then we give some in sparsity money. So by the time you get down to the bottom line, you kind of don't know how we got to this formula here. So I would almost figure out how much do we pay per student, per FTE in this state, and just divide that by the number of FTEs you have in your system, and you have a number. And you don't have to figure out if you're going to get some sparsity money. You don't have to figure out if you're going to get equalization money. I don't get any equalization money, and I'm the poorest county in the state. But we need to know what we're going to get, when we're going to get it, and just have a number so that it's pretty easy for the legislators to give $10,000 per student or $8,000 or whatever. We multiply it by the number of FTEs we have, and that's your money.
And the next question comes from Scott Light, please.
And it's for Kira Willis. This week we went beyond 60 years since Brown versus Board of Education. The Department of Education in D.C. released these numbers on Friday. 4 in 10 Black and Latino kids attend intensely segregated schools, and just 14% of white students attend schools that are deemed multicultural. I'm just wondering, is Georgia in that same range with those numbers, and how would you address school diversity?
I believe Georgia actually is in that same range if you were looking at it county by county, not necessarily and looking at the more diverse counties. If I were to address that, I would certainly open up school choice. And when I talk about school choice, I'm talking about affording students the ability to follow their passion and follow their promise. Currently, we have students who attend one school, their neighborhood school. And for my children, it's great. But schools can't be jacks of all trades. We can't afford career tech in every area for every child. So if we open up inter-county school choice and intra-county school choice for our smaller counties, then I think what we can do is the color of the skin of the child is not going to matter at that point. The child then will follow his passion or her passion and follow his or her promise. And at that point, they will also be successful in school. We'll have fewer dropouts and our graduation rate will increase.
And next question from Donna Lowry.
Mr. Bell, I know you've been on the board of a charter school, and of course there are the feelings that the charter schools take so much away from the traditional schools. I want you to answer the question on how that doesn't happen under your plan.
Well, charter schools are just an option. I'm for school choice. That means if a parent wants to send their child to private school, they want a homeschool or charter school, parents need options. Charter schools create solutions, and that's what I like about it. By law, my charter school is a public school. I was elected as a business leader. Our board has to be part business leaders, part teachers, and part educators. Part teachers and part administrators. One of the things I can show you that comes out of a charter school you don't see every day, my board sat down and realized that if we want to make our students more prepared for the workplace, they all need to take a personal finance class. Because what's wrong with this country is that students don't understand at an early age, if you don't have as much money going in as you have going out, that's a bad thing. We can make those decisions at a charter school level, and providing that choice to parents, I see all across the state being the future for education in the state.
We have time for a couple of more questions, and we'll get one from Greg Bluestein, please.
Ms. Chester, Governor Deal also said in his second term he would push to give the state more power to intervene in struggling school districts. You have personal experience with one of his interventions. He's talking about maybe even possibly intervening on academic grounds rather than a sort of government or structural grounds. Do you agree?
I agree. We need to hold districts accountable, because we're not doing that right now. We do not have consequences for district-wide failures, and in fact, that's one of the things in my platform focus. That's the C, consequences for district-wide failures, both academically and financially. You only get a county of DeKalb in a state that lets it happen. There are schools in DeKalb County that have 44% graduation rates, where not even every other child is graduating, and yet they've been doing this in perpetuity. The Department of Education has a policy, and it is we subsidize failure. And it's got to stop. And I applaud the governor in his efforts to want to address that. We need a policy that balances those districts that do a great job removing obstacles from their success and letting them go, and the districts that are not. We need to hold them accountable at the top level. And Tennessee is doing a great job of that. They have achievement districts and charter incubators, and we need to be looking at those types of ideas as well. And they're coming from folks at the top levels of education that have not been in the classroom. They're bringing these ideas.
That's all the time we have for that one. And Scott Light, do you have a final short question for us?
Can do it. For Mr. Johnson. Can you name a category or categories where Georgia is currently leading the nation? And if you had to pick one area where you wanted to lead right out of the gate, if you're the next superintendent, what would that area be?
Graduation rates. I would want to focus, hone in on the classroom, get as much resources as we can to get our best and brightest teachers in the classroom, and focus up on how we can achieve our better graduation rates in the classroom. It's right on the spot where I would head.
And that's all the time that we have for questions. Each candidate will now have 30 seconds for a closing statement, and by random drawing, Cheryl Dawes, you get the first closing statement.
First, I would like to make clear that I do have a teaching license and taught high school. I don't know how I got left out of the group meeting before the meeting. And I think that is an important aspect to have on my resume. But I think there are three job skills that are needed. One is, a different one is management. It is a big several billion dollar budget and 600 employees. I've done that with Monsanto Chemical Company. And the third set of skill set that is needed is it is a political position. And I have a long track record and a lot of endorsements from legislators that I will be able to work with in this job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Kira Willis, your turn for a closing statement, please.
Thank you. My name is Kira Willis. I'm a product of public school in Georgia, a teacher in public school in Georgia, and a parent whose children attend public school in Georgia. I'm so excited to be here. I look forward to working with the governor under his vision for education, with the legislative dollars, and with the State Board of Education so that I can travel around Georgia and work with our local schools and our local school boards. I truly believe that if you do not have educational experience, you should not be working in this job. Thank you so much.
And now, Michael Buck, closing remarks, please.
Thank you. I'm running on a platform of character, credentials, and commitment. This race, education, experience, and training matter. I've got a proven track record of success at every level of education. More importantly, I have a heart for young people. I'm passionate about helping every young person reach his or her potential. I will be a champion for our students, their parents, our educators, and our communities. Thank you.
And Fitz Johnson, it's your turn for a closing statement, please.
Thank you. I have proven leadership. 21 years in the military, 15 years running a private industry, a business that is twice the size of the current DOE. I have an undergraduate and a master's degree in education. I've been a coach for over 30 years. I spend more time with kids sometimes than than educators do in the classroom, and I have been there. So I will tell you this, on May 20th, I ask you for your vote, and I ask you for your prayers. Thank you.
And Nancy Jester, your final words, please.
Hi, I'm Nancy Jester, and I'm asking for your support on May 20th. For decades, we've been electing the same types of folks from the educational establishment, and they've sponsored our trip to the bottom of the barrel, so we've got it from here. I've actually found $54 million of deceptive budgeting practices that wore away the accumulated cash reserves of the third largest district in the state. That's cost taxpayers, kids, and teachers. I'm the person that on day one can inject the best practices into the state and drive us forward better for taxpayers and kids. Thank you very much.
And next, Ashley Bell, your closing statement, please.
Thank you. I'm for common sense conservative solutions. I'm not an educrat. Educrats have been taking your tax dollars and getting the results we see today. We don't want more of that. We need common sense solutions. I'm a charter school chair, so I see it at the ground level. I know what it's like to work with parents and teachers and get real solutions. All the edicts that come down from Atlanta, they haven't been working. We can't afford Common Core and all the other next generation ideas they have coming out of Atlanta. We need common sense ideas and solutions, and I can get that done. I've done it before as an elected official, and I'll do it as your next state school superintendent.
Richard Woods, your turn for closing remarks, please.
Okay, thank you again for having us tonight. I come, presenting a proven record for education, one that will focus on our children. We must make sure that we standardize we must make sure that we personalize and not standardize our child's education. We need to allow our teachers to, once again, teach. And that means don't let them teach the test, but teach the child. We've got to govern our education system. We've got to control it and make sure that our local school systems are the ones that have the say-so what they do and how they address their kids, and not the state office or the federal office. Thank you again. My name is Richard Woods.
And Mary Bacayao, your closing remarks, please.
I'm for academic freedom. I love kids. I started teaching when I was just 20 years old, and I've been a teacher for 25 years in so many different areas, so many different places as a college professor. I've been a consultant to school districts across the country to try and help them meet AYP. I've been successful with that. I am going to be the one to stop Common Core. That's what I'm going to do, and that's why I'm the only one that's a teacher that's also going to stop Common Core, which is why you don't hear them mentioning my name as a teacher. Academic freedom is what we need. We need it.
Sorry, your time is up. Thank you very much. And Alan Ford, you get the final closing statement.
I'm glad we only have 2 more days to hear the same rehearsed negative answers that I've heard for the last 2 months. I'm Alan Fort. I'm a visionary leader, an innovative educator. I've been around the state, teacher, coach, assistant principal, superintendent. We talk about in the building, here, there. I'm in the building every day. I understand education throughout this state. I love public education in Georgia. It has graduated millions of successful people over the last many, many years, and I will be a positive person to support education in Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. And that concludes our debate. We'd like to remind the voters that the primary elections are be held on Tuesday, May 20th, and early voting already underway. Actually, it's coming to an end this weekend. Our thanks to the candidates and to our panel of journalists. I'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging tonight's debate. Now, for more information about the Atlanta Press Club and all the debates they're hosting this primary season, you can visit atlantapressclub.org. This debate will be archived there. The debate will also be available on demand at gpb.org. Thanks for joining us.